Well, I'd like to thank you all for joining us today. My name is Joe Collinger, and our topic is how to avoid skill shortages in your organization. So we're going to do a little webinar on that. I'm going to give a presentation. We'll have a little bit of time for some questions and answers. And I will also have a couple of polling questions along the way. But first of all, I just want to say thank you very much for joining us. And I hope that our time together is both insightful and encouraging in giving you some ideas that you can use to help avoid skill shortages in your organization. So just to give you just a little bit of background, I am the founder and the Chief Technical Officer for Orgchart Software, and some of you may already know that our specialties are in the area of applications for workforce planning, organizational charting, and for HR analytics. And I'm going to be referring to some of those things today, but this is not a software-intensive topic. This really has a lot to do with strategy, methodology, and management. So eventually those things intersect with technology, but as we typically say in our company, if you're not going in the right direction, speed does not particularly help. So technology has its place, but there's certain things it's not going to solve. And I'm hoping that with the time we have here, that we can get a pretty clear idea on how it is we can go about solving it. So anyway, without further ado, I'm going to be plunging into our topic today. And a couple of comments here, sort of like the background of where we are with HR. So our world changes rapidly, lots of new demands. We've got a major outgoing of baby boomers and a major incoming of millennials into the workforce. And HR is being increasingly asked to step up as a trusted advisor to ensure that the talent gaps are being closed, because you've got effectively what is a brain drain going on in these organizations. And rather than just fix on failure or just go about this in an ad hoc, chaotic manner, we need some kind of a strategy to do it. So HR, as a trusted advisor, needs to understand how the talent mix affects the organization's survival and help make sure that they have the right kind of hires that are helping. There is no silver bullet. There is no single answer for this or single product that you can buy. If somebody's trying to sell you a product that's going to solve all of this, I know all of you would be reluctant to believe that, having been in this business for a while, that there is no single cure for it, but it's going to require an array of disciplines. So it's really on management to really figure out how to embrace the challenge and how to step up to solving it. So some of the things I'm also going to go through here is going to be experience that I've had with one particular case study that was pretty interesting, and I think sort of sums up a lot of what we have had to deal with. So first of all, I've got a little polling question here, and I'm going to start it here. And my question to you is, what is your role? So if you would please just take a moment, there should be a little control panel that you have in your GoToWebinar controller that will give you the ability to answer that question. So we're just going to take a moment, let's get some answers to it, and then we'll go ahead and I'll share that information. I just want to tune what I'm saying to the right audience. That's the reason why I'm asking this, because I sort of contour my presentation and my explanation to who I've got in the audience here. So I think I'm just going to let it go for another 5 seconds, and then we can close it off here. So let's see. There is a way to close this. All right. And as soon as we do, you should be able to see that 100% of the people have voted. And you should be able to see the results here, okay? Hopefully you're seeing that on your screen, that we have 50% are in the C-suite and the other 50 are in the VP or the director type of role. So let me continue with my presentation here. So there was a Deloitte study that was done, which was pretty interesting. And what this graph is showing two axes here. One along the X, the horizontal, is showing the level of urgency, and then the Y-axis is showing the readiness. So it's showing what topics, what things are most urgent for corporations these days. And there's three things I'm picking out here that are really far off into the super urgent or highly urgent realm, and that would be leadership and leadership development. The second item is talent acquisition, because if you don't hire the right people from the start, then everything is just fixed on failure. And then finally, the other item here is talent and HR analytics. So what's happening increasingly is companies are recognizing the importance of getting their hands around data that's going to help them make the right decision and make it repeatedly. So that's where talent and HR analytics come in. But if you'll notice, in terms of readiness, it is the lowest item on the matrix here for an ability to be able to actually implement talent and HR analytics. So we'll talk about a couple of things here that will help go from a state of being highly not ready or not able to do anything about this urgent need to a point where we can actually implement something. And so I'm going to give some suggestions on what that is. And hopefully by the time we're done, you'll have some ideas you can act upon. The other item here is that going to give you some priority in terms of what metrics make sense to go after. And of course, I'm always available to help if you want to have a conversation about your particular situation afterwards. But anyway, so this is the lay of the land. Thousands of corporations. It's a Deloitte study that was done a little over a year ago, and it's plotting what the critical items are and companies' readiness to do something about it. So I got another polling question for you here, and I really don't have much else. Okay, so regarding the global trends, I'm going to ask a question here. Regarding the global trends, do you agree with my three picks? The reshaping of the HR function, the leadership, and the talent metrics. So, and I'm asking you along the lines of, do you think those three are the most urgent for you, or not sure, or maybe they're pretty close? So let me just give a moment, and then we can answer that, and then we will move on. So you should be able to see that. And if you would please do a vote. I think we've got, I'm just going to wait another minute here, so you should be able to see this. If you would please vote. I'll keep this open another 15 seconds, and then we'll shut it down. Result: yes, no, not sure, or I think that they are pretty close. All right, do I have any takers? Okay, I'm closing out the poll now. And so what it's showing me here is that most of you are saying those global trends do look pretty reasonable. So what are the effects of talent gaps? So I want to talk to you about a specific client of mine that had a real challenge. And so this is a true story. The situation was that they came to me and they said, look, we've got this issue and we need some visibility into it. We've got 150 critical programs. This is a defense contractor just outside of Washington, D.C. And they said in our case, of these 150 critical programs that we're running, we've got a major problem. We are repeatedly getting hit by surprises with people leaving. Okay, so we've got a flight risk problem, or an actual flight problem. So the other thing is, a lot of our programs are delivering late, and that's tied to the fact that people are disappearing. They're not showing up. They've moved on to other projects or programs. And you do know that most companies are moving increasingly toward project-based kinds of work rather than having silo-based operations. So increasingly this is becoming an issue. Holding on to people, and then eventually if you don't have them at the right time, you wind up with late program delivery. And when you cut program timelines short, then you wind up with things that are not finished or quality problems. And that's what our client was running into. And the problem with that is that to fix anything that goes wrong, it costs way more than if you were to prevent it from happening in the first place. So as a result of the employee flight, the late project delivery, the quality problems, you had huge cost overruns. So you're not making the profit that you'd hoped that you would make or planned that you would have made. Finally, you wind up with customers that are dissatisfied and extremely frustrated with you. For a company like my client who had many strategic customers, this was a real problem because these guys are being expected to play the game at a very high level. They worked on the kinds of things that go boom if they don't work properly. So there's really very little leeway for something not being completed correctly on spec and to budget requirements. And eventually what was happening is they were losing customers. So this was a whole chain of events, a whole ugly chain of events that was hitting them, and they wanted to get some visibility into it. So they were asking the questions, brainstorming together, we found out, what pieces of data would help. And the other part was what kinds of visualization techniques might be helpful to get some kind of a sense of what that was looking like or what it was coming. So some of the lessons that we learned as we did the analysis here is the skill gaps are always in progress. Okay, so it's not something that just happens once in a while. There's always some degree of somebody getting ready to check out or move on or be poached from another team. What they needed was a method of getting an early warning. So what is in their case, it was interesting. They had information about indicators that something was going wrong. It's just that they didn't know what to look for. And so this brings us to the issue of managing risk versus managing problems. It's a whole lot better to manage something that has not yet occurred as a problem than it is to fix the problem. So this is the whole shift that they started investing in and looking at was what indicators are there? What early warning indicators are there that are going to give us an indicator that a problem is going to hatch? That also gave them some sense that we're going to have continuous improvement in responding to these early warnings. Now, a funny thing happens is a lot of companies that do things like key learning reviews or project postmortems. But in a lot of cases, they document all these things, they go through the process, but the results of what they find in their key learnings, they never incorporate back into any kind of a continuous improvement process. And this is all a management process, not something that you put on the individual contributors and the lower level management. This is senior management needs to take a position on being able to gear up for continuous improvement. And it all starts with a strategy that's robust and well connected to business results. So I've got this little picture of a house here that actually collapsed. And the funny thing about it was this house collapsed not because there was a tsunami or a tornado or a typhoon. This house collapsed because of termites. It was one little termite at a time, over time, that eventually led to the house crushing at all of a sudden a point of surprise. But had they known what to look for, they could have headed the whole thing off. So my point here is don't get blindsided. The reality is, in fact, that most companies do not have a strategy to manage talent risk. If they did, they would have known to look for the correct termites, and they would have dealt with the termites before the structure and the foundations of the building were destroyed. So how does your company score today? So in terms of managing the skill gaps, what do? Do you shoot from the hip? And let's say we've got to move. If we're a small organization, if we only have a few people, this is a garage startup, managing skill gaps is not as much of a daunting deal as it is if you have a company with 100 people, 500 people, 1,000 people. But it's like, what are your measures of success? You're going to need to understand that, because any skill that you acquire has got to be connected somehow to that measure. What do you need in terms of the people, process, and technology? And do you have a roadmap to address the gaps that you have? And if you do have a roadmap, how do you know you're making progress? In other words, what are the milestones in the interim measures? Okay, and that's really what you're looking for, is do we have a roadmap that is going to help us manage the skill gaps? So my client was getting eaten alive with these problems, and so eventually they had to develop a strategy that was connected to what really mattered, the 6 items that I showed you earlier, in terms of everything from a customer, resources leaving to customers actually quitting. So then that whole chain of events, they had to develop a roadmap to attack that. Okay, so the question might be, it's like, this thing can get complicated. Where do you start? Okay, so it's like this hydra here, this monster with many heads. Which one do you lop off first? And that was the challenge that my client had. So the strategy question. Okay, so we got to ask the business what's important and establish a baseline for that. Communicate frequently on how do we align with business priorities. That's really what strategy is all about. It's about aligning with business priorities. And this is stuff that's not new to you. I'm simply going to give you just some kind of a review, because I want to set some context. Because when you go back, you're going to have to explain this to other people, and perhaps there's a picture or two in here that might help you do so. So we've got to deal with the business strategy, which has to do with goals and direction. People, and as much as possible, we want to deal with competency-based profiles, not personality-based, not, one-off, a skill here, a skill there, but we want to really define what we need in terms of people that fit positions that are defined in terms of competency. And then we need some measures. We need some way of measuring that we've got the right key performance indicators. So a business strategy, it's great for us to all talk about that, but let's, just for the sake of setting some baseline, let's round it out a little bit. So we start with a basic thing called strategy, which deals with what is the end goal and how we're going to line up to get it. But included in that would be things like round out, make more robust our idea of strategy to include, how does the customer see us? What's the customer's perspective? What matters to the customer? And we always hear the term, oh, focus on the customer, focus on the customer. Well, that's got to be a very real part of the strategy. The other thing is, internally, what's our strategy for how do we continue to be really great at our core skill sets? What must we excel at? And we've got to look at that from a process value or a speed to value perspective, as well as a quality perspective. Finally, there's growth and learning, so we've got to continue to grow our people. And employees need to have skill and motivation. They need to have mobility. There's some of my clients who, they have indicators that if somebody's in the same job for 3 years, that's a real warning sign. It's a warning sign for the individual, and it's a warning sign about their manager, because they're being expected to be developed, to move on to other assignments, and to continue to gather increasing levels of experience and competence in the business. The last one here is the financial perspective, and how do we look to shareholders. So things like, better, faster, cheaper. All right, so cost reduction, growing the revenue, and leveraging the current assets. So when we talk about business strategy, let's just kind of consider the idea here that we want to round it out and have a more robust perspective of what that means. And this is the last polling question I've got for you. Regarding strategy, does your company employ this kind of a concept for setting strategy? So it's the one like I've got here. Do you break it down like this? Do you, when you guys talk about strategy, do you have this kind of a a robust concept. So I'm going to grab the final question here. And so if you'll just take a moment and answer, does your company employ this kind of a concept for setting strategy? So the answer is yes, or no, or not sure. In some cases, some of us are in companies that are so large that it might not be apparent or obvious to us. Okay, so I'm going to leave this open for another couple of seconds, and then I'm going to close it off and we'll proceed. I think we've got most people voting so far. Okay, that's great. So I'm going to close this off, and I'm going to share the results. And so what you should see now is that the answer I'm getting is that it's not sure. So that's fine. But as you discuss strategy, as you become that valued HR advisor, these are the kinds of tools and perspectives and things that you can bring that can be helpful. So I'm going to hide this now, and we will continue. So regarding a people strategy, let's just talk about what we've got to do, the concept for managing talent. And this, I'm going to show you a wheel basically here that is a competency framework. And we're going to, we run into these situations where somebody says, Bob quit. What are we going to do about replacing Bob? Well, that's sort of a personality-oriented kind of perspective. What we really need to think about is what competencies did Bob have, and how do we fulfill those competencies? So we're changing our thinking now. It's not that we don't love Bob and miss Bob, but we're thinking back to why was it that we valued Bob, and it was for the competencies, not for the fact that Bob was a good guy. We need to be able to connect to the business. Okay, so competencies that make sense for the business we're in. We need to know what to measure. Okay, those are going to be the critical things, and that's going to help us to be able to recognize the gaps and assess trade-offs and replacements. So let's go into this wheel that I had talked about, and it all starts with thinking about our talent or our people in terms of competencies or a competency framework that is basing every person. We start seeing them not just as personalities or as humans or our friends, but we see that in terms of the business, there's another perspective which evaluates them based on their competency. So we need to have our critical jobs with competency maps. And I'm going to go in a clockwise fashion here. So the first thing has to do with workforce planning. This is like, how do we know what people we need? All right, and I can give you, if you ask me for the slide presentation afterwards, I'm happy to send this to you where I expand on each one of these things. But we're determining, who it is that we need, how many of those roles do we need, what's the right mix, what's the right distribution. And the strategic staffing goes, all right, so based on where we're at in terms of company growth, are we in an increasing market, a decreasing market? Are we gearing up for new products and a new future? So the staffing is there's strategic issues around the kinds of problems we need to solve in this season. How are we going to reward these people and recognize them? How are we going to develop them? So like I was saying earlier, all the literature is pointed to the fact that we have this major exodus of older workers and this major entrance of younger workers. And so huge issues around how are we going to grow anybody that we bring in. Because we're looking at 75% cost in replacing somebody, so we better hire wisely and then learn how to develop those people. And then how are we going to manage their performance and help keep them properly directed and connected to the business? How are we going to develop new leaders? How are we going to determine how it is that we promote people and continue to fill the gaps that are being vacated by people who are either leaving the company, leaving the workforce, moving on to other assignments? And then the last thing here I put in here is collaboration, which is you've got all this talent, and it's like, create create mechanisms and ways and a culture that allows you to leverage off of all the talent that you have. Now, one of the things that was really curious with my client was that they were hiring redundant talent. And that sounds kind of funny, but there were a number of cases where they weren't even aware of the competencies that they already possessed, and they were just running out and hiring new people. And of course, you could understand that increases costs and it creates confusion. So collaboration has to do with how do you leverage an interplay between the members of your organization so that they help one another with things that they need. Applications like Yammer, for example, are really pretty cool in terms of an ability to help employees connect with one another and help one another on topics. So that your knee-jerk reaction isn't to run out and hire somebody. It may be that you already have the talent in-house. So anyway, so I'm describing this competency framework. This is a sort of a life cycle of, selection and onboarding of people on through the whole development, redeployment, and promotion of people. So this is the approach we want to consider when we think of a competency framework. Now, I've got a list of questions here. I am not going to go through all of these, but this is what was happening in most of the clients that I have. What's happening is that they're starting to ask key questions. At least their senior management is asking. And we'll just take like the top two or the top three. What does our attrition look like, by country or location or other criteria? Do we have sufficient backfill in these roles who are impacted by attrition? And what are the competency gaps for critical roles? And how early are we finding these? So these are like super critical questions, and I recommend them to you to help drive the kind of behavior that's going to put you in the position of being able to better manage the skill gaps, because you're going to be, if you start out asking the right questions, then it's going to drive you to the right metrics, the right processes, the right tools. And these are like the top, these are the top N questions that are absolutely critical. So I've got a client who's in the energy business. So, a large, so what, a Fortune 5 company. They're so big they're not Fortune 100, they're Fortune 5. And the president asked this question. He said, based on the plans that we have for the next 3 years, I need you, HR, to assure me that we're going to have the talent that we need to meet our business goals at that point. And so that question drives all the behavior and the proofs that we are working on the right thing to get the right people in place with the right competencies. So starting with asking the right questions, and you can do this as a trusted advisor, you can encourage the right questions to be asked by your executives. So some essential metrics, okay? So here's my point here. Without proper metrics, gaps are going to be impossible to manage. And that was happening with my client, the defense contractor. They really didn't have metrics in place that would help them understand what to look for. So as a result, they said, you know what, we're going to start gathering some information. And what information they decided on, I'll tell you in a minute, but there are some keys for implementing a metric strategy. Okay, what measure do we want? What are our measures today? What do you want it to be? So whatever the score is, you want to find out what is the goal got to be. And when you have a metric goal, then it's going to be something that's going to drive an improvement program. And what does that mean to the company? How is that going to be helpful? How is life going to be better for the company as a result of you moving the needle on a particular metric? So I get asked the question sometimes, are the top 10 metrics that I should be collecting for my organization? So I guess I would have to say I hate that question because largely it depends. But I would say this, if you don't have a metrics program going on, and I'm not talking about a work performance measure, but we're talking about a measure of your talent maturity, then let me propose a starter set, a place to start. Don't go trying to measure everything. I'm going to give you a set of 5, and if you were to implement just one and work on it for a while, that would probably be really helpful, and then later you can grow at it. But here's where it all starts: quality of hire. Get the right person for the job, and you should be able to measure that. You hire somebody, let's just say it's a year later. Is this person meeting the expectation that you had and that you would hope for? Were there questions that you should have asked, things you should have looked for, evidence that you should have demanded that would have given you better insight? All those things need to become part of the process. But this would be the first one. The second one would be bench strength, which is the right experience levels. And just as we think of a baseball team and the bench and the talent that's available among the players, so we want to think about what's available to us in terms of the experience levels we need for this company. There's another topic that's a buzzword, which is engagement. And in some ways, I like this term. In some ways, I think it's a little bit too fluffy. How engaged are the employees with the business? Now, newsflash, I think the Gallup survey that was done probably about a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, surveyed thousands of companies, and it was deemed that maybe 32% of people were engaged in their roles, 50% were disengaged, and the remainder were actively disengaged. So an engaged worker is somebody who's really helping the company to go in the direction that it needs to go. Someone who's disengaged is ambivalent or really doesn't care, and somebody who's actively disengaged is someone who's actually disruptive. That is, they'll be actually intending to do harm, or the term that I like is malicious compliance. Doing the right thing even knowing that it's going to inflict harm. Another starter set, the fourth item here is performance. To what extent do people meet, exceed, or do not meet requirements? And then the last one here is retention. This one would be, again, I mentioned a company where they saw it as a warning sign. If somebody was in a job for more than 3 years, they said something isn't right here. So this is an example of a starter set that you can use. And again, you don't have to use all of these. Just go ahead and get started on one. Find one that's probably the lowest hanging fruit for you and get a program going on it. And that'll make it much more manageable. There are other things that you could go and measure, but I would just suggest you take a look at these. This is probably a great place to start. Why I chose these metrics, because the quality of hire is where it all starts. 40% of companies believe that this is the most important metric, but 32% think that they are managing it well. So that's just a little reality check. Retention is better than replacement. On average, it's 6 to 9 months to rebuild talent, which is between 50 and 75% of an employee's salary. It's $4,000 just to fill a position. And then the last one I'll talk about here is promotion readiness. 72% of companies say they will have an increasing number of leadership vacancies, but 76% are less than confident in their abilities to adequately staff. How do most organizations identify and fill open positions? And the usual answer is passively. Okay, so that's not great. Looking forward, I'll give you a couple of other statistics. 51% of your people are thinking about leaving your company. 50%, and only 50% would recommend your company to a friend. 50% leave to get away from their manager. And I think you've probably all heard that most people actually they don't quit the company as much as they quit who it is they're working for. And let's see if there's another one here. Regarding the leadership in your company, a mission-driven company will have 40% higher levels of retention. 86% of business leaders cite leadership as a top issue, but only 18% of current managers have the high talent needed to lead in a way that improves the company's performance. So that might be hopefully not a bit of overload, but there are some stats here that are showing these are really some key areas that I just referred up here. These five would be just well worth going after. Okay, so let's talk about something else. One of the things I mentioned, so we're a software company. Big deal that we do is we take data about the HR situation in a company, and we help present it in a way that really supports the decision process. Now, I'm going to give you some examples. We've got ways of being able to see the gaps, get a clear view of the talent, and be able to see these things across the organization. So this is just a simple little example, and this is actually taken from my defense contractor client. It's all fictitious, so names have been changed to protect the innocent. But it's a way of getting standard view of each individual. The color coding means something. Okay, and so what we're looking at is if I go in a circular fashion around this, the little star in the up-hand corner means this person is of key importance to our customer. The three up arrows and the dollar sign indicates that we're paying significantly above market for this person. The three little bars, signal bars on the right lower side, that indicates the experience level of the person is very high. A number 3 at the left-hand lower corner indicates that on a scale from 1 to 5, this person is a middle-of-the-road performer. The gold background indicates that this person is an employee, and the pink indicates that this person is considering leaving. So this is just a standard view, and based on data, we have ways of presenting this for the entire organization. There are other kinds of perspectives that can be shown. So while some people might look at the software and say, oh, these are just org charts, well, it's actually, these are visualizations of the organization's talent. It just happens to look like a hierarchy structure. But this is another example showing FTE, headcount, whether the person's promotable, what their current role is. So then the other thing is we get into, what's the possibility of being able to see. In this case, we look at a box up here, and we can see the person's performance, their potential. We can see a 9 box, and we can see successors. Is a succession plan required for this person? Are they in a critical role? And do we have someone to take their place? So here's someone who's going to be leaving the company. They're a super high performer, and there is no known replacement for them. So we can see a skill gap already in the making here. Now, you could do this in a tabular form. That's not a problem. But then here is that we can see this all in context. And that's the value of being able to see some of this data in different formats, such as a hierarchy diagram. This is the Orgchart family of applications. I would be remiss if I did not mention that to you because I am the author of the application. So that's about as much as I'll tell you about my software. Here's another example, so to use for workforce modeling. So you can see managing open positions. All of you have been in situations where you've had to manage open positions. So there's ways of making this really pretty easy. So you want some technology that helps you with it and helps you very easily see where are the positions that are open, where are the positions that are going to be open. Now, the defense contractor I told you about, I don't know how clearly you can see this, but let me just tell you the story behind it. So we have levels of management going horizontal here. And we start with the highest level of management at the top, and we proceed to the lowest level at the bottom. And these are based on experience levels. not so much management levels. And what's interesting here is that anywhere you see pink on this chart, every one of these individuals spread across these different functions, anybody who is pink is someone who is going to be leaving the program. When they were able to put this information together for one of their senior board meetings, they were able to see that they had 30% of the people on the program who were getting ready to leave. And I've been asked the question, what predictive analytics did they use? And the answer was, this was really pretty low tech. What they did is they went around and they talked to each one of the individuals. And so that was probably the most reliable way, rather than trying to use some kind of heuristic to determine if the person was likely to leave or not, which they certainly could have done. It's probably just easier just to go flat out ask the person, you know, are you going to be here for the duration of the project, or were you, you know, or you promised, you know, that you were going to be. So the other thing that was very, very revealing is anywhere you see a box that has green, this is third party. This is a contractor. So what was happening was that as the programs were running late, third-party resources, third-party members of the team were actually having direct contact with the client. And I think if you can imagine that in many cases they were not giving a favorable perspective or report on my client's performance. So what was happening was there was a loss of customer intimacy, and because of that, they were actually losing customers. So when they were able to turn the lights on using this kind of a data format, they found that it was extremely helpful to answer a whole series of questions about what was happening with their programs. And they could see things about people that they'd hung on to too long, people that they were paying too much for, redundant talent. And if you'll notice to the far right, we've got one department here that says engineering and installation, and they've got only one resource in that group. And for this point in the project, that may have been okay, but at least it gives them an opportunity to see an area where potential. So can you see the skill gaps? Yeah, you can see the skill gaps. Can you see potential skill gaps? Yes. Can you see redundancy? Yes. Can you see the likelihood or the risk of loss to the team? Yes, you can see those as well. So this is just a quick example that shows you ways that you can peek into the future. So putting it all together, we want to build a strategy that includes the business goals. We're talking about that rich strategy that is more robust. We deal with the business, the people, the metrics. And the other thing I'd say is there's no silver bullet. I've shown you some technology, but that technology really relies on discipline, the right strategy, and the right metrics. I'd encourage you to start smart, okay? That is, don't try to boil the whole ocean. Start with a little bit at a time. Pick one metric to work with and get some good support and some sponsorship from your management for it. Use the strategy to leverage people and technology. Okay, so we're putting it all together. I showed you some visuals that do that and make it very simple. So protecting your company from the skill gaps is doable, and experienced a 50% drop in the unwanted employee flight. They experienced a 75% reduction in the loss of customers. They experienced a 100% reduction in the hiring of redundant talent. All these things were worth tens of millions of dollars. It was big money that they were saving because of that. But protecting the company is something you can do. There are some happy stories about it. I've told you about management commitment is needed to be able to pull this off. This is a management problem. This is not a technology problem. It's a management problem. And the positions should be based on competency as you think about people, the technology used to leverage your metrics, and then think think in terms of risk management. Risk management is also known as project management for adults. It's always willing to ask the question, I wonder if the sunny day scenario, what if that doesn't pan out? So you want to have some means of early warning. And then you want to be able to have an agile method for making continuous improvements. So while it seems like maybe I've droned on and on here, this is really all pretty doable. If you want to talk to me about it, we can discuss some strategies and some ways of tackling this for your company. The discussion doesn't cost you anything, and perhaps you could benefit from the experience that I have with my clients. HR is needed as an indispensable, trusted advisor. The pressure is on to be able to continue to increase in that. And so I hope that this information is helpful to you. My telephone number is presented as well. So listen, thank you very much for joining us today. I will follow up with you, sending this presentation, and hopefully you will all benefit from it greatly. Look forward to talking with you in the days to come, and wishing you the absolute best in nailing your skill gap issues. Thank you so much.